If you have ever stood in front of a room, or, even just sat across the table from your boss, and suddenly your mind goes completely, horrifyingly blank, well, your brain didn't actually fail you.
Right, it didn't glitch at all.
Exactly. According to the clinical neurology we are looking at today, your brain did exactly what it was shaped by millions of years of evolution to do. It treated your boss, or that audience, like a grizzly bear. You are literally experiencing a biological survival protocol.
Which is the great irony of human communication, really. I mean, the exact physiological mechanisms designed to keep us alive in the wilderness are the very things that sabotage us in a boardroom.
Or on a first date.
Oh, absolutely. When we perceive social pressure, we don't just get nervous, we undergo a systemic chemical hijacking.
And we are pulling from an absolute mountain of source material today to deconstruct that hijacking. We're looking at clinical speech therapy guides, cognitive science breakdowns on authentic communication, and deep analyses of verbal fluency from Study Smarter.
Plus, expert blogs on articulation from Say Now AI.
Yeah, and insights drawn from foundational texts by people like Carmine Gallo, Peggy Noonan, Sam Horn, and Thich Nhat Hanh. So our mission for this deep dive is to transform you from someone who might occasionally mumble or stumble over your thoughts or feel that cold sweat of panic into an authentic, clear, and incredibly confident communicator.
And the overarching theme across all of this literature is just profoundly empowering, because communication is not a genetic lottery.
You aren't just born with the gift of gab.
Right, while everyone else is doomed to be socially awkward, it's a highly mechanical, highly psychological skill, and like any physical or mental skill, it can be entirely re-engineered from the ground up.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can fix the actual words coming out of our mouths, we have to look at the biological reality of that grizzly bear response. I found an analogy in the source material that perfectly captures what happens to my brain when I'm put on the spot. The author describes trying to speak under immense pressure as being like trying to cook a complex 5-course meal on a cutting board the size of a postcard.
I love that visualization. It perfectly captures a clinical concept known as cognitive load and working memory compression.
To shrink a whole cutting board down to a postcard, that's intense.
It is. And to understand why that mental cutting board shrinks so drastically, we have to look at the sympathetic nervous system. When you perceive a threat, and again, the brain does not distinguish between the social threat of a bad presentation and the physical threat of a predator, your body is instantly flooded with a chemical cocktail.
Mostly cortisol and adrenaline.
Exactly.
Now, adrenaline makes perfect sense if I need to sprint away from a threat. It pushes blood to my legs and arms. But how does that affect my vocabulary?
Well, the human brain is incredibly energy intensive. And in a survival situation, the body just reroutes energy away from non-essential functions.
Like deep, nuanced, philosophical thought.
Right. Deep thought is considered highly non-essential when a bear is charging you. So your working memory, which is that mental workspace where you organize your thoughts, retrieve complex vocabulary, and string logical sentences together, is literally starved of its normal operational capacity.
Wow. So the cortisol just causes that mental workspace to contract.
It does. This is why a speaker's vocabulary suddenly regresses to a 5th grade level. You have all these ingredients, right? Your ideas, your data, your jokes. But you have zero space to chop them up. They just fall right off the edge of the postcard.
So we're essentially trying to perform high-level executive functions with a brain that has temporarily downgraded its own software. That totally explains why, after the meeting is over and I'm walking to my car, I suddenly remember all the brilliant things I should have said.
Yes, because the threat is gone, the cortisol drops, and your cutting board naturally expands back to its normal size.
Which brings us directly to how the brain actually processes communication in real time. The texts identify 3 distinct levels of processing, don't they?
They do. The baseline level is reactive processing. This is pure autopilot. Someone asks you a question, and you just blurt out the absolute first thing that surfaces in your mind.
I do this all the time at home. My spouse asks what I want for dinner, and my reactive brain just yells pizza. Before I even realize I'm not hungry for pizza, it's just a reflex.
And it serves a great purpose in very low stakes, highly familiar environments. But in a high-stakes professional or relational environment, reactive processing will almost always betray you because, well, there is no filter.
Right. Which leads us to the second level.
Intentional processing. This requires significantly more mental calories. You are consciously choosing your words, you're thinking a split second before you speak, and you are editing your sentences in real time.
The danger with intentional processing, at least in my experience, is that you can sound a bit like a robot. You're working so hard to say the right thing that you just lose all your natural rhythm.
Because your entire focus is internal. You are managing your own output. The highest echelon of communication, the one the sources say we should be aiming for, is strategic processing.
And that's where you're juggling multiple things at once.
Exactly. At the strategic level, you have simultaneous awareness of three separate dynamics: your message, your audience's micro-reactions to that message, and the overarching direction you want the conversation to travel. You aren't just surviving the interaction, you are actively orchestrating it.
Wait, I have to push back here. If my brain is currently flooded with cortisol, and my mental cutting board is the size of a postage stamp, I cannot just magically command myself to be strategic. I can barely remember my own job title.
No, you can't.
So how do we bridge the gap between a biological panic attack and Jedi-level strategic processing?
Well, you cannot think your way out of a physiological response. If the brain is overflowing with stress chemicals, you must use the physical body as an anchor to force a system override.
And the absolute foundation of that physical anchor across every clinical speech therapy guide we looked at is breath.
But it requires a very specific mechanical approach to breathing.
Because my default nervous breathing is terrible. I take these sharp, really shallow gasps right into the top of my chest. My shoulders go up, my neck gets super tight.
Chest breathing is catastrophic for public speaking. It creates a very thin, strained, tight vocal quality because you are utilizing a fraction of your lung capacity,
You inevitably run out of air mid-sentence.
which causes your volume to drop precipitously right on the final, most important word of your thought. The clinical demand here is diaphragmatic breathing.
Breathing from the belly.
It's a mechanical shift. The diaphragm is a large muscle sitting at the base of your chest cavity. When you breathe correctly, that muscle contracts and pulls downward, creating a vacuum that draws air deep into the lower lungs.
So visually, your stomach should expand outward on the inhale and pull inward on the exhale.
And your chest and shoulders should remain almost completely still.
The sources offer a fantastic, highly actionable physical test to see if you are actually doing this. Because I think a lot of people assume they are belly breathing when they really aren't.
The book test.
Right. You lie down flat on your back on the floor and place a reasonably heavy book, like a thick hardcover novel, right over your belly button. When you inhale, you should watch that book rise toward the ceiling. When you exhale, the book should fall. If your chest is expanding but the book is stationary, you are chest breathing.
It is a perfect, immediate biofeedback mechanism. Diaphragmatic breathing does two critical things simultaneously. First, it provides a massive, pressurized reservoir of air to support your vocal cords, giving your voice natural resonance.
That projection.
Exactly. Second, and most importantly for the cortisol hijack, deep diaphragmatic breathing physically stimulates the vagus nerve. This sends a direct, undeniable signal to your parasympathetic nervous system to initiate the rest and digest protocol.
It literally tells the brain, the bear has left the room. We are safe.
Yeah.
And the sources provide a specific tactical deployment for this, the 4-7-8 breathing technique. This isn't something you do while speaking, obviously, but something you do in the minutes leading up to the event.
The mathematics of the 4-7-8 method are specifically designed to maximize oxygen absorption and forcefully lower your heart rate. You inhale quietly through your nose for a slow count of 4.
You hold that breath, letting the oxygen transfer into your bloodstream for a count of 7.
And then you exhale completely through your mouth, making an audible whoosh sound for a slow count of 8.
I can hear people saying, I am about to go into the most important pitch of my life. I do not have time to sit around counting my breaths.
But the clinical data shows that executing this cycle for just 90 seconds measurably reduces cortisol levels in the bloodstream. 90 seconds.
You can do this in the elevator.
You can do this sitting in your car in the parking lot. You can do this in a bathroom stall. It's a 90-second investment to physically expand your cognitive cutting board so you can actually access your strategic mind.
So the cortisol is draining away. We have anchored the body. The biological panic is managed. But that really just gets us to baseline. Now we have to look at the actual physical mechanics of the mouth. Because I know plenty of people who are perfectly calm, but you still cannot understand a word they are saying.
That's very true.
Why do we mumble? And how do we actually re-engineer the way our mouths produce sound?
The Say Now AI source provides an incredibly useful diagnostic framework for this. They outline 4 distinct dimensions of clear speech: articulation, pacing, volume, and structure.
If a listener is struggling to comprehend you, The friction is almost certainly occurring within one of those four pillars.
Exactly. Articulation is the physical precision of the shapes your mouth makes. Volume is your environmental projection. Structure is the logical sequencing of your ideas.
But I want to zero in on pacing, because there is a statistic in the research that completely blew my mind. The data shows that if you intentionally slow your natural speaking pace by 20 to 30%, you improve listener comprehension by 34% in noisy environments.
A 34% boost in clarity just by putting on the brakes. We have to unpack the underlying physics of why that works. When we speak quickly, which is often driven by a lingering subconscious anxiety and a desire to just get the interaction over with, our articulators, meaning our lips, our tongue, and our jaw, simply do not have enough physical time to finish forming one sound before they have to rush to start the next one.
It is exactly like trying to run on a sheet of ice.
Yeah.
Your feet are moving frantically, but everything is just sliding and blurring together.
Linguists refer to this as co-articulation errors. The consonant boundaries blur. By slowing down your pace by 20%, you give your muscular machinery the micromilliseconds it desperately needs to physically strike and complete those consonants.
And the data suggests the absolute sweet spot for comprehension is between 130 and 150 words per minute.
Yes.
I've tried this, and I have to admit, speaking at 130 words per minute feels agonizing. It feels incredibly unnatural. I constantly worry that my audience is going to fall asleep or think I'm talking down to them.
That is the greatest illusion of pacing, though. You are experiencing the gap between the speaker's production speed and the listener's processing speed.
Because I already know what I'm going to say.
Exactly. Your brain wants to fly through the material, but your listener is hearing these concepts for the very first time. They have to hear the sound, decode the vocabulary, comprehend the meaning, and contextualize it within your broader point.
To the speaker, 130 words per minute feels like a crawl.
But to the listener, it does not sound slow. It sounds like thoughtful, grounded, measured authority.
It gives them the gift of time to digest the meal. But even if we slow down, we still have to tackle the mumbling issue directly. The sources give a slightly hilarious but incredibly effective physical test for this. If you have ever been accused of mumbling, you need to try the three-finger test.
It immediately diagnoses the root cause of poor articulation.
You literally take 3 fingers, stack them vertically, and place them right in front of your lips. Now, try to read a sentence out loud while opening your mouth enough to accommodate the height of those 3 fingers.
What you realize the second you try this is that mumbling is not a tongue issue. It is almost entirely a jaw issue.
We simply do not open our mouths wide enough to allow the vowels to resonate. We speak with our teeth practically locked together, trapping the sound inside our own heads.
Vowels carry the volume and the emotion of human speech. If your jaw is tight, your vowels are suffocated. But if vowels are the vehicles of volume, consonants are the vehicles of clarity. The texts make a major, repeated point about the absolute necessity of emphasizing final consonants.
We're talking about the hard T at the end of the word just, or the D at the end of hand, or the K at the end of think.
Because in the English language, a massive amount of semantic and grammatical information is carried right at the very end of the word. Is it past tense? Is it plural?
Right.
When you drop those final consonants, when just becomes just, the listener's brain has to suddenly burn precious cognitive energy trying to decode what you just said based purely on context clues.
If you force your listener's brain to work that hard continuously, they will eventually just tune you out, because cognitive fatigue sets in.
Exactly.
But let me push back on this, though. If I am in a casual meeting with my team, and I am hyper-articulating every single final consonant, hitting every T and like a snare drum, won't I sound like a Shakespearean actor who wandered into a corporate boardroom? It feels so theatrical.
It feels theatrical to you because you are hyper-aware of the new muscular effort. But sound waves dissipate rapidly over distance. By the time that crisp T leaves your mouth, travels across the conference table, and enters the listener's ear, it does not sound theatrical.
It just sounds remarkably crisp and professional.
Right, you have to over-index on the production side to achieve clarity on the reception side.
So we have the jaw dropping to let the vowels out, the crisp final consonants acting as punctuation marks, and the slower 130 word per minute pacing. But how do we practice pulling the right words from our brain on demand? The Study Smarter research introduces this deep dive into verbal fluency.
And they divide it into two very distinct cognitive camps: semantic fluency and phonemic fluency.
These are the two primary filing systems your brain uses to store and retrieve language.
Right, they are. Semantic fluency is your brain's ability to generate words based on a specific meaning or category. For example, if I ask you to name as many fruits as you can in 60 seconds.
Apples, oranges, bananas, kiwi, pomegranate. You just run down the grocery aisle in your mind.
Phonemic fluency is entirely different. This is the ability to generate words based on their sound or starting letter, completely divorced from their meaning. If I ask you to name as many words that start with the letter F as you can in 60 seconds.
Frog, frantic, formulation, friction. Wow, that is actually significantly harder. My brain wants to group things by meaning, not by spelling.
Phonemic fluency requires much higher executive function. It forces the brain to abandon its normal associative pathways and search its database via raw auditory structure.
Both of these filing systems need to be optimized if you want to be able to pull the perfect, nuanced word off the mental shelf at exactly the right moment during a fast-paced conversation. And the sources provide a literal gym routine for building this verbal muscle.
Yes, starting with a physical warm-up for the vocal cords, yawning and humming.
You force a massive, exaggerated fake yawn to aggressively stretch the jaw muscles and lower the larynx. Then, as you exhale, you hum-ho-hum.
It gently vibrates and relaxes the vocal folds. Then, the daily prescription is to read aloud for 10 minutes a day. Not silently reading a book on the couch, actually speaking the words out loud to train the eye-brain-mouth coordination.
But my absolute favorite exercise comes from the William and Mary Writing Resources Center, tongue twisters.
They seem juvenile, but they are utilized by elite broadcasters and actors because they force your articulators into extreme, unnatural gymnastics.
I'm going to try one live right now. Let's see. A big baby buggy with rubber buggy bumpers. The B sounds just aggressively bounce off each other. Or the absolute classic, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked?
You can physically feel your lips, your teeth, and your tongue having to work in intense coordination just to survive the sentence.
It's a workout.
And if we pull back and connect this to the broader neurobiological picture, practicing verbal fluency with these specific exercises doesn't just make you sound smoother on a microphone. The neuroscience indicates that consistently engaging in complex, high-friction language tasks promotes profound brain plasticity.
It is essentially weightlifting for the prefrontal cortex.
It's deep cognitive armor. Maintaining high verbal fluency is actively linked to building cognitive reserve and guarding against neurological decline as we age.
But practicing your articulation, you aren't just becoming a better speaker today, you are actively protecting your brain's structural integrity for the future. Okay, so let's take inventory. We have conquered the breath, we have dropped the jaw, we are hitting our consonants, and our brains are sharp. But here is the next massive hurdle, and it is where so many smart people fail. Having a resonant voice with perfect breath support is entirely useless if your thoughts are a jumbled, chaotic mess.
It is the all dressed up with nowhere to go syndrome. A beautiful voice delivering a completely incoherent message.
How do we structure our words so the listener can actually follow our logic, especially when our brains are moving a million miles an hour? I mean, I am incredibly guilty of going on wild tangents. I will start answering a question, remember a related anecdote, pivot to that, and 3 minutes later, I have completely forgotten what the original question even was.
We are transitioning here from the physical mechanics of speech to the executive function of speech. The Toronto Speech Therapy Source addresses this phenomenon beautifully, particularly regarding how scattered, rambling speech is fundamentally misunderstood by society.
People generally assume that if you ramble or can't get at the point, you must not be very smart or you don't know what you're talking about.
Which is a tragic and wildly inaccurate misconception. Scattered speech is almost never an issue of low intelligence. It is an issue of overloaded executive function.
The brain's internal project manager gets overwhelmed.
Right. It sequences incoming information, prioritizes details, and monitors output. The sources explicitly note that this is incredibly prevalent for adults with ADHD.
The text highlights that neurodivergent individuals, or adults with ADHD, often possess brilliant, incredibly fast-moving, highly associative minds. They see connections everywhere, but they struggle to sequence those brilliant ideas into a linear, real-time narrative.
Your brain is simultaneously processing 5 amazing interconnected thoughts, and the mouth attempts to communicate all 5 at the exact same time.
The result is the speaker wildly jumping from topic to topic, which the listener perceives as confusing tangents. and dragging along a massive amount of what the literature calls verbal baggage.
Verbal baggage.
All the extra words, the half-finished sentences, the throat-clearing preambles, the defensive disclaimers we drag around with us because we're trying to buy time while our brain figures out where the sentence is going.
Exactly. So how do we unpack that baggage? The sources offer some incredibly practical frameworks. These act as rigid guardrails for a fast-moving brain. The first one from Toronto Speech Therapy is the PRP method. P-R-E-P.
It stands for point, reason, example, point. It is an absolute lifesaver for managing cognitive overload in professional settings. Let's walk through a detailed example of how this actually saves you in a high-stakes moment. Let's say you are in a tense meeting and the VP turns to you and asks an open-ended question. What do you think about transitioning the department to a fully remote work model?
A scattered brain will immediately start rambling about their home office setup, how much they hate commuting, their internet speeds, and their dog.
But if you use PP, you force the chaos into a mold. First, the point. I am a strong advocate for moving to a fully remote model.
Notice what happens there. You state the thesis immediately. There's no meandering preamble. The listener instantly knows your stance.
Then, the reason. Because our internal data shows it drastically reduces environmental distractions and increases deep work. Then you anchor it with an example.
For instance, last month during the pilot program, the engineering team finished the Q3 audit 3 full days ahead of schedule because they had uninterrupted focus blocks.
And finally, you close the loop by restating the point. So overall, I find it to be a highly effective model that we should scale up.
The hidden genius of the PRP framework is that it dramatically reduces your own cognitive load. When you are put on the spot, you do not have to invent a narrative structure from scratch while 15 people stare at you. You just pour your existing knowledge into the pre-built PRP mold.
It gives your chaotic thoughts an unbreakable spine. Now, I can hear a listener thinking, this sounds incredibly robotic. If I use this rigid structure, when I'm just talking to my spouse about where to go for vacation, they're going to think I'm giving a legal deposition. PRP feels a little too corporate for storytelling or casual conversation.
That is a fair critique. PPEP is designed for analytical persuasion. For narrative contexts, sharing news, or recounting an event, the sources recommend a saucer framework called the hand-speak strategy.
It is a 5-step framework, easily mapped onto the 5 fingers of your hand so you never lose your place. Step 1 is to introduce the topic. I read a fascinating article this morning. Step 2 is to state the main idea. It was analyzing how a 4-day workweek actually boosts overall corporate productivity.
Step 3 is to provide one specific detail.
They tracked thousands of workers and found that employees accomplished 15% more total work in fewer hours because they were better rested. Step 4 is to inject your opinion. I honestly think our industry is going to be forced to adopt this within 5 years.
And step 5, which is the most critical piece of the entire puzzle. Ask a question to pass the conversation baton.
What do you guys think about a 4-day model?
The ask phase is what separates a conversation from a monologue. It ensures you do not verbally monopolize the space, and it guarantees that your story actually lands purposefully, inviting the listener into the ecosystem.
But inside these macro frameworks, whether you are using PRP or HandSpeak, the microarchitecture of your actual sentences matters immensely. The Saynal AI source was absolutely ruthless about sentence structure.
Because clarity demands brevity. The human ear processes information very differently than the human eye reading a page. The ideal spoken sentence length, according to the auditory processing data, is shockingly short, 12 to 15 words.
12 to 15 words. If you actually count that out, it is incredibly brief. You can barely fit 2 thoughts into 15 words.
Which is precisely the point. It forces you to isolate one thought per sentence. The greatest enemy of the 15-word spoken sentence is the nested clause.
Oh, the nested clause. The which is, and the who was, and the even though. Let me give you an example of how I usually talk, and you tell me why it's terrible. The new software update, which we started developing last year back when the old VP of Engineering was still here, despite all the massive budget cuts we faced in Q2, is finally launching next week.
That sentence is an auditory nightmare. When you use a heavily nested clause like that, you introduce the subject, the software update, but then you force the listener to hold that subject in their fragile working memory while you take them on a massive, wandering detour about old VPs and budget cuts.
Desperately hoping they still remember what the original subject was by the time you finally arrive at the verb launching.
Exactly. It places an immense cognitive tax on the listener. The fix is to ruthlessly chop it into 12-word linear blocks. The new software update is launching next week. We started developing it last year. We pushed through significant budget cuts to get it done.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because the ultimate sentence lengthener, the absolute worst offender for destroying brevity and flow, are the filler words, the ums, the us, the likes, the you-knows, the right.
They are a linguistic epidemic, largely driven by our discomfort with silence.
And the Say Now AI source points out that filler words are not just an annoying auditory quirk. They actively fragment your sentence structure and fundamentally impair the listener's ability to comprehend your logic.
They destroy the prosodic flow, the musical rhythm of your speech. Rhythm is how the brain predicts information. When you constantly inject you break the predictive rhythm.
Meaning the listener's brain is constantly stumbling, unable to anticipate where your logic is heading. So what is the tactical replacement for a filler word? The solution is incredibly simple, yet psychologically terrifying. Silence.
It's the deliberate, unapologetic pause.
If you feel an bubbling up in your throat, you just stop. Close your lips, you say nothing. Replacing a filler word with a 2-second pause feels, to the speaker, like jumping out of an airplane without a parachute. When I try this, I feel utterly naked.
I get that.
I am convinced that everyone in the room is staring at me, wondering if I've forgotten my lines or if I'm having a medical emergency. 2 seconds of silence feels like an eternity of failure. But how does it actually feel to the listener?
The perception gap here is massive. To the speaker, it feels like a failure. But to the listener, that 2-second pause feels like a purposeful, authoritative, generous gift. It gives their brain a much-needed microsecond to process the profound thing you just said before you hit them with the next thought.
It signals immense confidence, not confusion. The speaker who can comfortably hold silence is the speaker who commands the room. We have to train ourselves to be comfortable in the void of silence, which actually leads us perfectly into the deepest hurdle of all.
The inner monologue.
Yes. We can have the PRP framework memorized. We can master the diaphragmatic breath. We can chop our sentences down to 15 words. But the actual physical delivery of those words is heavily dictated by the invisible conversation that is happening inside our own heads before we even step up to the microphone.
And if your internal voice is screaming that you are an imposter, that you are boring, that everyone is judging you, no amount of breathing techniques is going to magically make you project like Winston Churchill. Your body will betray your thoughts.
This is a profound neurological reality.
It is. The inner voice you hear right before you speak is rarely an objective assessment of the present moment. It is usually reading from a deeply ingrained script that was handed to you a very long time ago.
Maybe the internalized voice of a highly critical parent or a harsh teacher who embarrassed you when you read aloud in the 4th grade.
Exactly. And your brain utilizes a filtering mechanism called the reticular activating system, or RAS, to ruthlessly enforce that old script.
The sources compared the reticular activating system to a modern social media algorithm, which I thought was brilliant.
It's a flawless comparison. Your brain receives millions of bits of sensory data every single second. Visual, auditory, tactile. It cannot process it all, so the RAS acts as a bouncer. It filters the data and only lets through the information that aligns with what you are already focused on.
If you engage with anger on social media, the algorithm feeds you more anger.
Right. If you constantly tell yourself, I am an awkward, terrible public speaker, your RAS algorithm receives that directive and aggressively highlights every single piece of data that proves you right. It will hyper-focus on the one time you stumbled over a consonant or the one guy in the 3rd row checking his phone.
It provides constant, undeniable confirmation bias for your worst insecurities. So my brain literally filters out the reality where 90% of the room is nodding and smiling and agreeing with me, and only feeds me the reality where I cleared my throat awkwardly.
Exactly. It completely hides the positive data because you haven't programmed it to look for positive data.
But let me push back on this, because this sounds suspiciously like self-help magic. If I am standing backstage, about to address a massive all-hands meeting, my heart is pounding at 120 beats per minute and my hands are visibly shaking. Isn't it just delusional, toxic positivity to look in the mirror and tell myself, I'm not nervous, I'm just so excited to be here? My body knows I am lying.
That is the most common and most valid resistance to this concept. But the clinical science has a fascinating, empirically proven answer. It is not toxic positivity because Physiologically and hormonally speaking, anxiety and excitement are entirely identical states of arousal.
Wait, I need to make sure I heard that right. They are identical.
Biologically identical.
Yeah.
When you are terrified of failing or when you are thrilled about winning the lottery, your body does the exact same thing. You experience the exact same heart rate spike, the exact same cortisol and adrenaline surge, the exact same pupil dilation.
So the physical state of high arousal is the same.
The only difference, the only variable, is the cognitive label your prefrontal cortex assigns to that physical state.
So my body just hands my brain a massive cup of pure adrenaline, and my brain has to look around the room and decide what to call it.
Precisely. If your brain looks at the audience and labels that adrenaline, anxiety, or threat, your body reacts defensively. You physically constrict, you cross your arms, your vocal cords tighten, your breathing becomes shallow.
But if you consciously, forcefully relabel that exact same cup of adrenaline as excitement or readiness,
your brain interprets the chemicals as preparation for a high-performance athletic event. It shifts the energy from a threat response to a performance enhancer. You physically lean in, your chest opens, your voice projects, and you become highly dynamic.
that is absolutely wild. It is essentially running an internal PR campaign to spin your own nervous system. We aren't panicking, folks. We are just highly caffeinated for greatness.
The clinical term is cognitive reappraisal, and the data shows it works remarkably well. But there is another massive psychological trap that anxious speakers fall into, and it is the desire for total control. That trap is memorization.
Oh, writing out a script word for word and memorizing it.
Yeah.
I used to do this for every single presentation in college. I thought it was the only way to guarantee I wouldn't sound stupid.
And it is a guaranteed recipe for a catastrophic breakdown. Why? Because human interaction is unpredictable. If you have memorized a rigid script and you lose your place, maybe the projector dies or someone asks a question, your cognitive load instantly crashes.
You have no backup neural pathway.
The sources strongly advocate abandoning scripts entirely. Instead, you must aim for a state they call flexible mastery.
Flexible mastery, I love that term. Meaning I do not know the exact chronological words I'm going to use, but I know the terrain so intimately that I could navigate it blindfolded.
The GPS analogy works best here. If you memorize a script, it's like memorizing one specific route to the airport. If a bridge is closed, you are hopelessly lost.
But flexible mastery means you understand the entire map of the city.
Exactly. You know the core concepts so thoroughly that you could explain them 10 different ways. If a listener's question knocks you off your planned route, you don't panic. You just seamlessly recalculate a different path to the same destination.
It completely removes the terror of forgetting your lines, because there are no lines to forget. And when you achieve that state of flexible mastery, when you aren't desperately trying to remember your next bullet point, you can finally deploy the most powerful psychological tool in human communication.
Storytelling.
Yes. The insights here from Carmine Gallo's Talk Like TED and Peggy Noonan's On Speaking Well are profound. They relentlessly emphasize the power of the personal anecdote.
Because the human brain is literally hardwired for narrative structure. Data informs the analytical mind, but stories move the emotional heart.
Gallo introduces this concept of emotional staging. When you share a vulnerable personal story, a moment of failure, a moment of realization, you aren't just transmitting facts. You are staging a shared emotional experience for the audience.
What is happening neurologically during a story is incredible. A well-told narrative literally bypasses the listener's critical filters. If I just stand there and list statistics about a corporate problem, your brain's defense mechanisms remain engaged.
You are actively looking for flaws in my methodology or logic.
Right, but if I tell you a deeply human story about one specific employee who was crushed by that problem, your critical filters drop. Empathy takes over the neural network, and we create a direct, unmediated human connection.
Okay, so our minds are right. We've relabeled our adrenaline, our frameworks are tight, we are breathing deep, and we are armed with vulnerable stories. But as we look at the physical body, the texts point out a harsh reality. Your body is a radio station that never, ever stops transmitting. What is your physical body saying while your mouth is moving?
This connects directly back to the hormonal realities we discussed with cognitive reappraisal. Your physical posture does not just broadcast your level of confidence to the audience. It actually dictates your level of confidence to your own brain.
Wait, my posture changes my brain chemistry? How does that mechanism work?
The psychoneuroendocrinology research on this is profound. Adopting an expansive, open physical posture, pulling your shoulders back, opening your chest, physically claiming space in the room, actually alters your blood hormone balance within a matter of minutes.
It triggers an increase in testosterone, which is the hormone linked to confidence, assertiveness, and risk tolerance.
Simultaneously, it measurably lowers cortisol, the stress hormone we've been fighting this whole time.
So by simply deciding to sit up straight and roll my shoulders back before a meeting, I am literally self-medicating with confidence hormones.
You are hacking your endocrine system. Conversely, when you fold inward, when you cross your arms tightly over your chest, hunch your shoulders up to your ears, trying to make yourself physically smaller, you are sending an urgent telegram straight to your nervous system saying, "We are prey, we are in danger, be small."
And your brain will immediately oblige by making you feel overwhelmingly timid, defensive, and anxious. So expansive posture is step one for the body. But what are the eyes? Eye contact is where so many people completely freeze up. It either feels way too intimate and vulnerable, or people overcompensate and end up staring unblinkingly like a serial killer, making everyone uncomfortable.
Amazingly, the sources actually provide the exact mathematics of eye contact.
They do, and having a mathematical formula takes the emotional guesswork completely out of it. Here is the golden formula from the texts. In a one-on-one setting, you should aim to maintain 70% eye contact while you are the one listening, and only 50% eye contact while you are the one speaking.
Let's break down why that ratio exists.
Okay.
70% while listening shows deep, active engagement without aggressive staring.
But dropping to 50% while speaking allows for natural cognitive breaks.
When you look away, gazing slightly up or to the side, it signals to the listener that you are accessing memory or formulating a complex thought. It is a natural visual cadence.
That makes perfect sense for a one-on-one coffee chat. But what about groups? If I am standing at the head of a conference table talking to 8 people, I usually just kind of pan my eyes back and forth across the room like a motorized lawn sprinkler.
Which is incredibly unsettling for the audience because your eyes never actually land. No one in the room feels like you are speaking to them. You are just painting the wall with your gaze.
The rule here is to anchor your eyes. You hold direct eye contact with one specific person for one full, complete thought. The text defines this as roughly 3 to 5 seconds. You deliver a complete sentence to person A. Then you intentionally break contact, pivot, and deliver the next complete sentence to person B.
I know holding eye contact with a single person for 5 full seconds feels intensely long and almost aggressive when you first try it, but you have to push through that discomfort. It creates a series of highly intimate one-on-one micro-connections.
When you do this systematically around a room, it collectively makes the entire audience feel deeply engaged. It exerts a magnetic command over the room's attention. It anchors the room. And speaking of commanding attention, let's talk about the physical voice itself as an instrument. Because vocal variation is the difference between a captivating speaker and a sedative.
Vocal variation is the ultimate antidote to the monotone delivery. When someone speaks on a single, unchanging musical note at the exact same volume for an extended period, the listener's brain literally classifies the sound as non-threatening background noise.
It categorizes your voice the same way it categorizes the hum of a refrigerator or an air conditioner, and it tunes you out completely.
You have to constantly vary your pitch, your volume, and your pace to force the brain to stay engaged with the new auditory data. But there is one specific, highly common vocal habit that the experts warn against emphatically, calling it a credibility killer.
Uptalk.
Uptalk.
This is when you end your declarative statements with a rising pitch, like they are a question. So it sounds like you are constantly asking the room for permission to speak.
Precisely. It turns solid, factual sentences into insecure inquiries. I think we should proceed with the merger in Q3. It completely guts your professional credibility.
Even if your data is flawless, the listener subconsciously processes that upward inflection as a lack of conviction.
You must train your voice to land your sentences on a firm downward inflection, which biologically signals certainty and unshakable authority.
Which brings us to a truly beautiful neurobiological concept. If you combine the expansive posture, the 3 to 5 second anchored eye contact, the deep diaphragmatic breath, and the authoritative downward inflection, you trigger something magical in the listener's brain. You mentioned this briefly earlier. Mirror neurons.
Yes. The discovery of mirror neurons changed our entire understanding of human empathy. When you speak, and someone is watching you, the neural networks in their brain fire in patterns that physically mirror your own state.
They physically, internally experience a shadow of the emotions you are broadcasting. It's emotional contagion.
Exactly. You are the thermostat of the room, not the thermometer. If you walk into a room and speak with high, nervous, frantic, shallow breathing energy, within 5 minutes, the entire room will feel a low-grade anxiety. They will catch your stress.
But if you walk in, take a massive diaphragmatic breath, drop your shoulders into an open posture, and speak with a warm, grounded, unhurried authority, the room will literally catch that grounded feeling. You will watch their shoulders physically drop.
And the sources argue that this emotional contagion is the true, demystified secret of charisma. Charisma isn't magic. It isn't being the loudest, funniest extrovert in the room. Charisma is the intentional, masterful management of emotional contagion.
You decide how you want the room to feel, and you physically embody that feeling so powerfully that everyone else's nervous system calibrates to yours. It is a remarkable, almost intimidating responsibility when you realize the power you have over the biology of your listeners.
It really is.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of ground regarding how to project our own thoughts out into the world clearly and charismatically. But communication is intrinsically a two-way street. The ultimate test of your verbal fluency isn't delivering a rehearsed 20-minute monologue on a brightly lit stage.
The ultimate test is how you navigate high-stakes, real-time, highly emotional, difficult dialogues. Because a conversation is a living ecosystem. You cannot control it entirely with a framework. You can only skillfully navigate its currents.
And navigating it requires a skill that sounds incredibly passive, but according to the literature, is actually the most cognitively demanding, active thing you can do. Active and mindful listening.
We draw heavily in this section from Thich Nhat Hanh's The Art of Communicating and Mortimer Adler's philosophical concept of dialectical conversations. True, profound listening is shockingly rare in modern society.
Adler points out that true listening requires the brain to hear three distinct layers of data simultaneously, right?
Yes. The literal dictionary definition of the words being spoken, the emotional current running beneath those words, and the unspoken fundamental needs driving the emotion.
But it is so incredibly hard to do that because of the internal commentary trap. When someone else is talking, especially in an argument, my brain is not analyzing their unmet needs. My brain is frantically drafting my rebuttal, finding the flaws in their logic, or just thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch. I'm not listening. I'm just waiting for my turn to open my mouth.
Which means you are just reloading your weapon. You are not engaged in a dialogue. You're engaged in alternating monologues.
Exactly. Reloading. To short-circuit that defensive reloading reflex, the sources suggest utilizing validating statements. When someone finishes speaking a highly charged thought, instead of immediately launching into your counter-argument, you pause and say, "That makes complete sense," or "I can entirely see why you would feel that way given the timeline."
It is vital to understand that validation is not agreement. You are not conceding the argument. You are not saying you are factually correct.
You are simply saying, "I hear you, I comprehend your reality, and your emotional perspective is valid."
And that simple acknowledgement drops the other person's amygdala defenses almost instantly.
And once their defenses are lowered, your word choice becomes the steering wheel of the conversation. The linguistic framing of a situation can change everything. I want to share this specific analogy from the text because it is so incredibly elegant. Imagine two department heads who are constantly fighting over budget resources.
If you are the manager trying to mediate, you could walk in and say, "You guys are totally misaligned and fighting, and it's ruining the project."
But instead, you deploy an analogy. Right now, our departments are acting like brilliant musicians locked in separate practice rooms. We are just producing chaotic noise when we finally come together.
What is psychologically brilliant about that metaphor is that it clearly defines the dysfunction without triggering a threat response by pointing fingers.
The implied solution isn't to punish the musicians for playing badly. The implied solution is to simply provide them with a shared sheet of music so they can play in harmony. The vocabulary you choose literally shapes the reality of the room.
The expert insight on this was highlighting the profound difference between saying to your team, "We have a massive problem," versus "We have a complex challenge."
The word problem instantly triggers a neurological threat response. It implies blame, immovable roadblocks, historical mistakes, and impending failure.
The word challenge, however, triggers an achievement response. It implies an obstacle that can be overcome through ingenuity and teamwork. It gamifies the friction. You can literally shape the emotional resilience of an entire team just by swapping out those two words.
But what happens when things move past just a challenge and get actively, personally hostile? We have all been in conversations where someone is accusing us, attacking our competence, or acting aggressively. The deeply ingrained biological instinct is to fight back. to defend our territory.
But Sam Horn's book, Tongue Fu, offers a completely counterintuitive martial art for the mouth. She introduces the agree and redirect method.
It is a linguistic judo move designed to instantly disarm hostility without ever escalating the conflict or backing down. Let's run a scenario. How does it actually work in practice?
When someone attacks you, they often use aggressive, accusatory "you always" statements. For example, a colleague yells, "You always leave my team out of the loop on these major client emails." Your biological instinct is to fiercely defend your ego. You yell back, "No, I don't. I CC'd you on 3 emails just last week."
The trap is set. You are now in a tug of war, trading subjective facts, and nobody wins a tug of war. You're just screaming past each other.
To utilize agree and redirect, you simply drop your end of the rope. You acknowledge the core of their frustration and you aggressively redirect the energy toward a future solution. You say, "You're right. Cross-department communication on this account has been fractured and frustrating lately. How can we set up a bulletproof system for next week so nobody misses an update?"
You agree with the underlying premise that communication is currently flawed, but you refuse to take the personal bait, redirecting all that aggressive energy away from analyzing the past and toward constructing the future.
And the sources heavily emphasize avoiding the word "you" entirely during conflict resolution, saying, "You make me feel completely undermined in front of the client," triggers instant explosive defensiveness.
They feel attacked, so they counterattack.
Switching the grammar to "I feel" statements completely changes the game. I feel undermined when major timeline decisions are communicated to the client without my prior input. It takes total ownership of the emotion without attacking their fundamental character.
It is crucial in these moments to remember the ultimate objective. As we mentioned earlier, the goal of a difficult conversation is almost never to win an argument. The goal is to reach a functional understanding.
If you try to win, that means someone else has to lose. And if you force a colleague or a partner to lose, the relationship takes permanent damage. You might win the battle of the budget, but you lose the war of collaboration.
Which naturally leads to our final critical concept in this section, ethical influence. Because if you master diaphragmatic breathing, if you eliminate filler words, if you master storytelling and the agree and redirect method, you will become a highly influential person.
People will follow you, and we have an obligation to ensure that influence remains ethical and never crosses into manipulation.
What is the defining line between persuasion and manipulation? Because they use the exact same psychological tools.
The line is intent and autonomy. Manipulation relies on coercion, withholding information, and exploiting fear to force an outcome that solely benefits the speaker. Ethical influence is facilitation.
You are utilizing clear communication to help someone see a perspective or make a choice that genuinely benefits them.
The sources highlight relying on the principle of reciprocity, giving immense value and respect before ever asking for it. They highlight genuine social proof, showing how others have successfully navigated similar choices, rather than manufacturing false urgency.
And my absolute favorite tactic for ethical persuasion, helping people clearly compare the cost of action versus the cost of inaction. Often people are terrified of the risks of trying something new, but they completely ignore the massive compounding risks of staying exactly where they are.
Ethical persuasion doesn't force them to jump. It just holds up a crystal clear mirror to both sides of the equation and lets them make an empowered choice. It fiercely honors their autonomy while providing total, unclouded clarity.
Okay, let's unpack this. So what does this all mean for you tomorrow morning? We have gone on an absolute deep-sea journey over the last hour.
We have deconstructed the mechanics of communication from the deepest neurological levels to the subtle physical adjustments of the jaw.
We started by understanding that the panic you feel isn't a character flaw or a sign of weakness. It's just cortisol shrinking your cognitive cutting board because your brain thinks your audience is a bear. We learned to expand that mental workspace forcefully using the 4-7-8 diaphragmatic breath to trigger the vagus nerve.
We learned the counterintuitive mechanics of actually slowing down your pace by 20% to sound more authoritative, dropping the jaw to release the vowels, and striking those final consonants to drastically reduce the listener's cognitive load.
We tackled the chaotic, scattered brain by implementing the PRBP framework and the hand-speak strategy, giving our brilliant ideas a solid, unbreakable spine. We chopped our sentences down to 15 words. We embraced the terrifying, powerful 2-second pause to entirely eliminate filler words.
We discovered how to hack our own inner monologue, using cognitive reappraisal to relabel our anxiety as high-performance excitement, and utilizing the 70-50 rule for anchored eye contact to build real magnetic connection.
And finally, we explored the deep emotional intelligence required to actively listen beyond the words, to reframe problems as challenges, and to navigate intense conflict by dropping the rope with the agree and redirect method.
It is a comprehensive lifelong toolkit.
It really is. And as we close, I want to remind you, the listener, of something incredibly important. Perfection in communication is a complete myth. The most articulate, highly paid professional speakers in the world still stumble over their words. They still say, occasionally. They still lose their train of thought and have to recalculate their GPS.
The goal of everything we discussed today is not to turn you into a flawless, over-rehearsed robot. The goal is authentic, unhindered human connection. When you trip up, you just keep moving.
To anchor everything we have discussed, I want to leave you with a profound reflection drawn from one of the most remarkable sources we referenced today, Jean-Dominique Bauby's breathtaking memoir, The Diving Bell and the Butterfly.
It is an unbelievably powerful story. Jean-Dominique Bauby was the editor-in-chief of French Elle magazine, a man whose entire life was built on words and communication. At the height of his career, he suffered a massive stroke that left him with a rare neurological condition known as locked-in syndrome.
His mind, his memories, and his brilliant intellect were perfectly intact, but his entire physical body was completely paralyzed.
He could not speak a single word, he could not turn his head, he could not move his hands. He had only one physical ability left in his entire body. He could deliberately blink his left eyelid.
Just one eye. Everything else was locked inside.
Yes, and using an excruciatingly slow system where an assistant would read through a frequency-ordered alphabet and Bauby would blink his left eye when they reached the correct letter, he wrote an entire book.
Letter by agonizing letter, word by word, blink by blink, Jean-Dominique Bauby dictated an eloquent, soaring literary masterpiece about the human condition.
It is hard to even fathom the patience and the burning desire to communicate that would require. I pose this thought to you, the listener. If one man, trapped inside a paralyzed body, could articulate the vast, echoing depths of the human soul, the vibrant beauty of his memories, and the tragedy of his condition using absolutely nothing but the blinks of a left eyelid, imagine the sheer power, the influence, and the potential sitting inside your own vocal cords right now, waiting to be unleashed.
That is heavy and so incredibly beautiful.
How much more of your authentic self, your brilliant ideas, and your leadership could you share with the world if you stopped hiding behind filler words, behind rushed pacing, and behind the evolutionary fear of judgment?
That is the question I want you to carry with you this week. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. The next time you feel that cortisol panic rising, the next time the diagnostic X-ray of your communication seems murky and unreadable, remember that you have the exact physiological and psychological tools to clear the picture. Take a deep, diaphragmatic breath, drop your jaw, and let your ideas be heard. See you next time.